my name is Kathryn Muse, and I'm a props artisan with the Alliance Theatre in Atlanta, Georgia. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I took these very dated cabinets and for a little bit of effort and very little money, turned them into more modern cabinets. And this is how they turn out. So we've gotten the doors off, and this is what we're starting with. And this is what we're trying to get to. So the first step is to sand off this shiny finish. So you just go in, I've got 220 grit on here. You put your safety glasses on. So then you sand down just to take off the shine. We're not going on to raw wood, just getting the shine off. So I'm sanding all sides and edges because eventually the whole thing will get painted, and paint sticks better to sanded wood than shiny wood. Then you just have to clean off all your powder, which I'm going to use our little blower to blow up. So my goal was to cover up this pretty dated design on these doors and to give it a more 3D mission style look. I couldn't completely cover it up because the curves go so far into the corners, and if I had had pieces that wide, I thought it might look silly. So what I came up with was a measurement of 2 1/4 inches for my doors. Your doors could be completely different. And what I used on top of the doors is 1/4 inch MDF. So came up with a measurement of 2 1/4 inches, and I just ripped strips of scrap leftover MDF 1/4 inch to then put on the doors. And after that, the next step is to just go in, get your exact measurements, and cut each piece. All my doors pieces are cut lengthwise, so the longer pieces lengthwise in the corners go over, and then the shorter pieces are always in the middle. So all my doors are consistent, shorter pieces in the middle of the door. And so I'll measure all of these pieces and cut them to be the exact size. So I measured and came up with 22 1/2 inches and drew it out on the MDF. And because I need 2 pieces that are that exact same length, you make sure your blade goes exactly where your line is, and then you put in a stop, and that way you can cut multiple pieces to the exact same size. That are the exact same length. So I've cut 2 pieces for the sides, and to get my measurement, the easy way to get my measurement for the third piece is to put these in place and then measure for the middle piece, and then I'll cut those 2. So now I have all 4 pieces cut to size, and the first doors I did, I used little brad nails, and I glued and brad nailed down the pieces. The problem with that was that this thin MDF likes to make little humps and bumps, and I didn't like it. So what I started doing for these is just gluing them. And since I've taken the finish off of this, if I use wood glue and I weigh it down, I haven't found any issue. And then after that, what I do is I fill all the edges with Bondo, so to get it all nice and smooth, and then that gives it an extra little bit of seal. So what I'm going to do is just put all these in place, glue them down, and then weigh it and let it dry. And what you can do before you glue these down is, if you have any really fuzzy edges from the saw, is go ahead and hit them with your sanding block or what orbital sander, whatever sanding device you have, just so you don't have little fuzzy edges that you then have to deal with. Out here it doesn't matter as much, but on this side it'd be hard to reach them. So the tricky part with this is getting it weighed down without it sliding. And there's two ways. You can weigh it, literally weigh it down, or you can clamp it. And for now, I'm just gonna glue them and try weighing it down. And I'm gonna go ahead and get glue on these inside pieces too. Also, what I did at first was glue one piece at a time and wait for it to dry and be stable before I'd glue the next piece, but it was incredibly time consuming, so I started just gluing them all down at once and meshing them in place and weighing it all at once. I haven't had any issues from doing it that way. I'm going to go around and tweak all the edges and make sure that it's all lined up as true and close to the edges as I can get it. So, I was misremembering how I did it before. The weights make it very tricky and the pieces want to slide. So what I've done is just use clamps, got them all in place, and as some glue has seeped out, I've gotten it, but any extra glue seeping out, we'll just sand it off later. And that's it. We'll wait for it to dry, and then once it's all dry and secure, we will Bondo the cracks. I should let the glue dry longer, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to go ahead and unclamp. It's been probably 30 minutes to show you the next step. So we take all the clamps off. And what I didn't love personally was this new funny edge on all the edges. So what I decided to do was go in with Bondo on all the edges and these four seams, and then once the Bondo's dry, you sand that down, and once you paint it, it looks like one solid piece of wood. So I'm just going to mix up a little bit of Bondo and put it on the edges and let it dry. And I'm using all-purpose putty Bondo, sandable in 15 minutes, which it is. You've got to work pretty quickly with this stuff because it'll start drying on you as you're putting it on. And I don't do too much at a time because, like I said, it will start drying up on you. So the amount that I think I can work with is all I do at a time. And it's got instructions on the amount of this to this. But generally a big dollop and a small amount of this is what you need. It's the hardener. And you mix it really, really well. Then once you know that you've thoroughly mixed the two parts together, you start slathering it into your edges. Knowing that you can sand off any parts that are overhanging later. But try to keep it neat, because that's less work for you later. Ideally, you should wear gloves when you use this stuff. Don't do as I do. It also has a pretty potent smell, so work in a ventilated area or outside. This warehouse is really big, so I'm not concerned about it. And I try to get these seams as close as I could, so they're pretty small, but I just want to try to force in, if there is any gap, force a little bit of Bondo in there, so when I paint it, there isn't a big gap. The Bondo is starting to harden up now. The hotter the weather you work in, the faster the Bondo sets up and the shorter your window to work with it. So as you can see, it's starting to solidify now. But I've gotten all the edges and the seams, and then we just let it dry for, I like to give it usually a little bit more time than the 15 minutes it says, to be sure it's hardened all the way, and then you sand it. So I've waited about 20 minutes. We will see, it's a little humid outside. We'll see if this is set up enough to where I can sand it and make it smooth. Again, 220 is what I'm using on the sander. So I've got a smooth front, smooth edges all the way around. That once you paint will basically look like a solid piece of wood. The only other spot I'm going to hit is this slightly sharp edge, inner corner of the MDF, just because things could catch it and we want to make it a little bit smoother. And that's it. The next step will be to paint them. I have new paint that I'm trying that claims you don't need to prime at all, but since this is completely raw, just like raw wood, the MDF pieces, it'll soak up the paint, so I may prime this outer spot, but I shouldn't have to prime the all the pre-finished wood. And that's it. Alright, so everything is dry and sanded, and we are now to painting. The first set of cabinets that you saw in the beginning that are finished, I used oil-based paint, and the process was very time consuming, and the paint was very temperamental. And so with the next set of cabinets, I'm trying a water-based paint that I found online, and we'll probably put links underneath the video if you want to know more about the paint. But it's supposed to be an all-in-one, kind of like a chalk style paint with wax and everything already built into it, so it's less shiny, but it's water-based, so I can wash all my brushes out, all my tools, and reuse them, as opposed to having to basically throw everything away. So with this paint, just make sure that it's well mixed, which I mixed this earlier, so I'm just going to make sure nothing is separated. The paint doesn't tend to separate a whole lot, it's pretty smooth. And after I put 2 coats on, it seems like I don't need to worry about having to prime these pieces first. They just want you to, they really say you don't have to sand, that you can just degloss cabinets if you're going to paint them. So my bases that the doors go on, I am just deglossing with a chemical deglosser, and we will see how it turns out. So I'm going to pour a little paint, and then show you the process that they recommend doing. With this particular paint, in order to get rid of the brush strokes, you quickly apply the paint, not very thick, into the crack areas that are hard to get into first. And then very quickly fill up the rest. And you're going to end up doing 2 coats no matter what. And so far, the ones I've done, I might put a very quick 3rd coat on the outer pieces, but I definitely don't need to do it on the inside. As you can see right now, everything is very brush strokey, but they have this little applicator that the same company that sells the paint sells, and which I went ahead and bought, and it seems to work pretty well to basically give you the finish of a roll, like a very smooth, maybe a foam roller. The difference being you end up using a lot less paint with this process than you do with a foam roller. Alright, so you quickly get it all painted, and then this is the applicator that they sell, and you literally just tap. If you have too much paint on it, it might get a little bit bubbly. And the only key to this, it has to be very slightly damp with water before you start, or else, you know what, I don't know what happens, but they say to wet it first, so just following the directions. And you'll see it's not full coverage yet, and if I want to, I can go back right now and add a little bit more, or I can wait until the next coat and add a little bit more. But basically what this does is takes out those brush strokes and basically gives you a finish like a roller. I'm doing the outside parts first because the MDF soaks that paint up faster than the finished wood in the center. I have a little bit of pooling, so I'm going to get that pooling out with the brush. And then do the center part. I'm not really worried about the paint strokes showing on the edges because they're so thin, so I'm not worried about tapping like this on the edges really. And that's the entire process. So once this is dry, I'll do one more coat, and then it'll look just like this. And once all of that's dry, I'll do the flip side, and then do the bases, and then put it all back together. So I figured I'd show you how I did the cabinets themselves as opposed to the doors. I did not sand at all. I used a pre-paint cleaner slash deglosser, which I wore gloves, and you spray it carefully on, and then with a cloth already dampened with this, you wipe it quickly, and I did that twice. And theoretically with this paint, that would be good enough to give it a really hardcore finish after 2 coats. And what I'm doing is I've taped off every place that I don't want the paint to get, though eventually this wallpaper will go, so I really shouldn't have worried about it back here, but I taped off every place I didn't want the paint to go. And because I'm not using a roller, I really haven't had to worry about putting drop cloths down because it's not dripping, because you're using such a small amount of paint at a time. So I'll just show you a little bit of what I've been doing. I'm just going a section at a time and putting paint on, and then using that same tool and taking those brush strokes out with it, and then doing another little section and taping it down, and just a section at a time. And for the edges, I've taped in right inside of the first piece of wood here, so paint doesn't get beyond that. And I'm just going in with my brush and painting those edges. And because it's on the inside, I'm not even worried about the brush strokes. I'm just going to let it dry and put a second coat so it has good coverage. But like I said, I'm not worried about the brush strokes in there. And I'm not getting any drips, I'm not getting any splatter, unlike the first set of cabinets that you saw in the beginning of the video. I had tons of splatter with that foam roller everywhere and had to very carefully cover the floor, the countertops, the walls, and had tons of paint in my hair. Nothing here. And that's all I'm doing. Now for these parts, because they do show, I am going ahead and hitting those. And that's it.